I have nothing but love for everybody.
Yeah, that's nice of you.
Peace and love.
Hmm.
Yes. Yeah. And
Does
I
that?
survived. I drove and I survived.
Oh yeah, you told me driving out there in Russia is a pretty harrowing experience, huh?
It is. All you have to have is a United States license and a certified translation of it, and anybody can drive. And nothing makes any sense. Traffic will turn into a straightaway, and those people have the right of way with no signs, or if there probably were signs. But so I made it live, but and I figured out all you have to do is drive as fast as you can until you have to slam on the brakes and ignore everybody, and then you'll survive.
Wow. What if you drive
That's all.
slow? What happens? I mean, there's got to be some old people driving slow or something, right?
I haven't seen that yet.
Huh.
Maybe it's a Darwin thing. Maybe they don't last.
Yeah, right. That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah, I don't know. But
Wow.
yeah, it was over in Sochi last week, and it was.
Hmm.
We talked about it on my show. It was
Yeah.
absolutely beautiful, beautiful place.
Hmm.
Very nice, tropical, and mountains right there. You can ski all in one day. You can ski and you can swim in the Black Sea.
That's pretty cool. That's
It is pretty
amazing.
amazing. It is pretty awesome.
So that's and the mountains are that high where like is the weather different? Like it was nice at the beach but cold up on the slopes.
Oh yeah, snow on top.
Wow.
Not enough snow to ski. You could probably do some snowboarding, but you'd have to go around a lot of the rocks, the rock croppings and stuff like that. But you could actually ski, and then you could actually swim the same day.
But you can do snowballs and snow angels.
Oh, it
Did
did.
you?
It did the snowball thing, yes, on
Yeah.
the top. Oh yeah.
Because those are my favorite snow activities. Being from Colorado, I'm just a wuss. Especially these days. Well, with the back issue that I mentioned last week,
Oh yeah.
um, I can't really involve myself in some of the other sports. So I stick to the snowballs and the snow angels.
Well, the snow angel could be kind of like hazardous if you're falling back.
Yeah,
I would think. Hmm.
yeah, good
Well,
point.
yeah.
And
So just
something I forgot to mention yet last week when I did talk about my ankylosing spondylitis, and someone pointed this out, a woman who's a listener, and she has it. So women can have it too. It's most common in men, but women can have it too. So,
hmm.
if you've got back pains and you're in your 20s. In fact, I heard from another listener who's got back pain, and he's a younger guy, and he's going to go get checked out. So we'll see what happens. But
Hey, if you just change one person's life, you did a big thing.
yeah,
So.
that would be awesome if, to catch it, like, so people know, like I didn't. And, I kept going to my general practitioner and I would think that, they would do something and I would tell them about my back pain and sure, I realize back pain is common and there's lots of lots of things that cause it. But, if one of them would have done an x-ray or suggested I go to a rheumatologist, I could have caught this a lot sooner and probably saved a lot of mobility
Hmm.
that now I don't have.
God.
So it would have been especially dangerous for me driving in Russia because I can't turn left or right that much. So, but I guess as you say, you don't want to pay attention to the other drivers. Just
No.
do your own thing anyway.
Yeah, you might be better off that way, actually.
Yeah, with some
Yeah.
blinders.
Ignore everyone and they'll ignore you.
Hmm.
That's basically what it is. Yeah.
So my
And you'll have to
guest,
relax. Ooh.
I have not. This is kind of a group I've been curious about, to be honest, and I have not had anyone on to talk about it. So I was really excited to have Bob Davis on. Bob Davis is part of FREE, which is the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. Now they're actually called the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. I had received emails from actually Edgar Mitchell about this group. Apparently, they've taken on his name and he supports their efforts. He didn't apparently have much involvement. Um, uh, However, and we talked with Bob about that. However, yeah, he was enthusiastic about their work. And I've been curious about this group because I've had Kathleen Martin on and to talk about her study she did with Denise Stoner. So I wanted to find out, how this group is different. And so I was able to find that out. But not only that, Bob Davis here is like a neurologist. He's got, a number of degrees. Well, he's worked in neuroscience. That's what his Ph.D. is in. He's worked in audiology, but he's done a lot of interesting things, and they're being very careful about how they do these inventories and study. Essentially, people who believe that they've had extraterrestrial encounters, which I think is an important distinction because we don't know whether these people actually have. Yeah. So it's really interesting what they're finding.
Yeah. Bob is a good guy. I've talked to him before. Very bright and enjoyable. So it'll be a good show.
Yeah. So, however, before we have Bob on the show, we talk some UFO news, and we always let you start it off. So, yeah, is there some UFO news you want to talk about?
Sure, why not? This was a sighting that happened in Philadelphia at 5:45 p.m. On April 16th, and the Pennsylvania witnesses in Philadelphia reported watching and videotaping a cross-shaped UFO hovering nearby. And this is a MUFON case, 75873, and so they were actually driving to a food truck fest, and after they parked their car and started walking, his wife made a comment about the moon being overhead, and when he looked up, he noticed there was an object just hovering, and so he got his cell phone out and started filming, and you can watch the film. It's on the Open Minds, the link's right there embedded, and you can see this thing is just sitting there. And when I'm first looking at it, I thought, well, maybe it's a balloon or something like that, but all of a sudden it starts dropping and dropping. And this is a quote from the witness. This was a broad daylight, not a cloud in the sky. My wife and I both watched it hover for about 1 minute before it appeared to first come down lower from the sky. And they got excited because it went from hovering to moving downward slowly. Then it stopped again, and they got more excited, and it changed directions, unquote. So this particular guy was he is a amateur astronomer, and he looks up in the sky. He didn't think it was a drone, and they both guessed that it was somewhere around 10 to 15,000 feet in the sky. I watched it. I think it's possible that it is a drone. They drew a cross-shaped, like a double cross-shaped, for as far as what the craft looked like. I think, Alejandro, do you know this? Drones can stay fairly stationary in one area. I'm not talking like a helicopter drone, but the winged drones. I do believe they can stay fairly stationary.
Oh yeah,
go
definitely.
Real slow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what do you think about that video?
I don't know. I in the video, like you said, you can't really make much out, and a lot of people are looking at the drawing that was provided by the witness and saying, well, duh, that's obviously one of those drones. You know, the real popular camera drone, of course, now we're starting to see more variety, but for the longest time we've seen just that, the DG Phantom or something like that it's called, but so people are like, duh, that's obviously a drone. And it could be. I mean, in fact, I think you can't rule that out, which is difficult. The MUFON investigator looked into it, and he closed the case as an unknown. But, yeah, interesting.
I think that's pretty common, isn't it, for them to close cases as unknown?
Yeah, I mean...
But they're not really closed.
Yeah. I mean, in this case, unknowns are never closed. There are no MUFON cases ever completely closed. And in this case, the investigator said that the witness was adamant that this was not a drone, and so he kind of took the witness's word for it because he felt that they were, that he trusted their word. So that's one of the hard things, what can you do? So I guess he felt that the video evidence, kind of like you, is not, or I agree, not sufficient enough to make a conclusion. So, but
Yeah,
it
the
is
thing's very
shaped by a
tiny.
drone. Yeah, so I
Mm,
can see how people would feel that way.
right. Yeah, it's so tiny at first, and he has, as he says, live on the recording, he has it at 4x. He has it. He had it,
Yeah,
and he couldn't really see it. He just aimed it in the direction of the moon because he knew it
yeah,
was near that. So that's why it's in the corner of the screen.
yeah,
But it's enough to see that it's definitely something, and I think you can see when it's moving. It's hard to say because it's just open sky, but
yeah,
anyway, um, yeah,
yeah,
maybe he's right. Maybe it is something else.
yeah. So we'll see. Who knows? So, in other news, a couple other stories I want to talk to you about. One I haven't written about yet, but I will probably by the time this show airs. So, I'm sure I will. But the other is this one. The Robert Hastings. I don't know if we talked about this, but I don't feel it's a problem. I'm going to talk about it a lot because it's awesome. So Robert Hastings has made a documentary, UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary, or that's his book. The movie's called UFOs and Nukes, The Secret Link Revealed. And it's a great documentary. Of course, many of you are probably familiar with his work since I had him on the show recently. But I just wrote a story about something that Robert and I had talked about on my show a couple of weeks ago. And it's just if people wanted to get to read the quotes from these guys, I've got this in the story. And this is a couple guys who have come out to talk about how they were radar operators at Bentwaters Forest or Bentwaters Base in the 80s when UFOs were seen there, the famous Rendlesham Forest sighting, and that they did track a object on their radars, and the thing also flew and stopped near the radar tower, so they got to take a look at it. So I wrote a story
Right.
because this is pretty significant that they're on camera talking about this, and I've got pictures of what the object looked like, and a large orange ball with portholes around it. So really, really interesting stuff. I highly recommend people go download this video, but yeah, really cool that these guys came forward. And you know what? I was speaking with Lee Spiegel earlier, who had talked to Charles Holt, who was the deputy base commander at the time, who also saw the UFO. And Holt had told him about these guys, and I guess they were nervous about coming forward before they retired because they just thought they might get in trouble. But it looks like they have not faced any negative repercussions for talking about this, as far as I understand. But really great case. But that just shows how how much of an impact this event had on their lives. And when you see them talk about this, you can see that. And Hastings tracked these guys down and just says something that you have two of these guys in the tower who are saying we both saw the radar hits. They were stranger than anything we've seen, and we both saw the object, and this thing was weird looking.
Yeah, and very fast. It went.
Right.
I forget how fast across the screen it went. They were saying, it goes to show that evidence still can come out.
Yeah.
A really good case, and that whole thing. I remembered there was something wrong with the memo that he typed, the wrong date or something, and they couldn't find any radar. At first, they couldn't find any radar reports or something. Do I have that right?
I think it was because there was some confusion about the dates. I don't remember the details about this, but there was confusion about the dates, and I don't remember if the memo was still wrong or if the memo was right and the other people. I forget the details, but I do remember that.
Yeah. I do recommend. I actually downloaded that movie myself, Robert Hastings' latest that film, and highly recommend it. That part is one of the main parts I thought was very interesting in that movie, is when those two guys were talking about that.
Tons of
the
great
round orange ball with porthole-like windows.
Yeah. Tons of great first-hand testimony. So the other story, I'm not sure if you've even had a chance to hear much about. So George Knapp interviewed on camera Tom DeLonge in a running series that they're going to do on KLAS, which is the TV station that George Knapp works for. George Knapp, of course, being an investigative journalist. We've talked about him a lot because he's a great researcher and has done so much important work. But Tom DeLonge, they played a couple of the first two segments of their interviews last night. And Tom DeLonge claims that he essentially is going to be the harbinger of disclosure, that there are these insiders who have knowledge, firsthand knowledge of UFO secrets, and that they are talking to him, and they want him to come out with this information because he's a public figure. And he said in the future there'll be more information, but George Knapp in the second interview was able to get out of him that he claims that these guys have told him there has been a recovered alien being, essentially, and that there have been crashes, UFO or really alien spacecraft crashes. So that's what he's claiming.
Yes, I had an email from someone this morning about that whole thing with all the links. I haven't looked into it yet. But, it's the first thing that comes to my mind, and I don't know about what you thought or whatever, but why him? Why would they choose him to speak on such an important topic and not someone like our president or someone like that?
Yeah, or even maybe Michio Kaku, or someone with a high level of credibility who's open to the topic. So I think that's a great question. I mean, certainly Tom DeLonge is not someone who is seen as a credible person, and that's nothing against Tom DeLonge at all. It's just he's a rock star. And unfortunately, people don't look, highly upon them as far as, their scientific knowledge or anything. And, he's had controversy behind some of the silly stuff they sing about and stuff like that, which is fun. He's a rock star. He's fun, entertaining. People love him. But that's why he said he thinks they chose him, is that because he's plugged into the younger generation, and he has a wide audience and a lot of people that listen to him. Because he said that he was curious why they chose him too, and that's why he says they say they've chosen him. But of course, there's a lot of scrutiny that has to be employed when you're dealing with these people making these claims. So we'll see. And then, of course, we have no insight into their credentials or how he has verified these credentials. I mean, my fear is that it's like, Dan Burrish he's talking to, or somebody who claims to have all this knowledge when they really don't, or maybe even Richard Doty or someone else.
Yeah, I was just thinking of a disinformation tact.
Yeah,
that could be another possibility, which would not be very funny.
Yeah, so it's good and bad. I mean, it's good in that it's I don't know. There'd be people who disagree. It's mostly good in that we have some interesting stuff to look into. I know some researchers like Hastings.
I'm certainly going to be open-minded to whatever.
Yeah, and I know there'll be people like Hastings who will be more skeptical, and I certainly have a degree of skepticism because we have to see how well vetted these people were. And George Knapp, for instance, is someone I would trust to be able to vet people. So hopefully he is working closely with Knapp, and but it is, so some pretty hefty claims. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, that's it for my news for today. You got anything else? Hello? Did the Russians abduct you? So apparently we have lost Martin. So, but, he's all the way out there in Russia. I think it's a wonder we've been able to catch him at all. So, and he sounded great while he was here, but we've had connection issues, so we lost him. However, we still have our interview with our guest, and we were done with the news anyway. I was going to say is, okay, thanks, Martin. Talk to you later. And he would have said something funny like, yeah, I don't know what he would have said, but it would have been pleasant. And it's too bad we missed the end of his news and the transition there. But, oh, well. Anyway, let's go ahead. Thank you, by the way, Martin, for being on the show and helping us with the news as usual. But let's go ahead and talk to our guest, Bob Davis. I am very excited to welcome to the show Robert Davis. Hello, Robert.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. You've got quite the academic background with a few degrees, and maybe if you could tell us more about your professional background to start off.
Well, I received a doctorate in neuroscience from Ohio State University, and I taught for the State University of New York for over 30 years. I'm now retired, and I guess my second job is serving as on a research team for the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. The acronym is FREE. I recently wrote a book which is called The UFO Phenomenon, Should I Believe, which is available on Amazon. And I'm in the process now of writing another book on the afterlife, which has some unique phenomena associated with UFOs, but like near-death experiences and reincarnation, consciousness, quantum physics, etc. So I'm busy somewhat in my retirement years and having fun.
Well, that's great. So interesting. What were the type of courses that you taught?
Oh, it's neuroscience, research methodology, audiology and hearing science, things of that nature.
Yeah. And then at what point did you become interested with UFOs and or extraterrestrials?
I've always been interested in the phenomenon, like millions of others, and I'm not entirely sure why. But it began as a child and evolved over time. Read all the books, watched the movies, etc. And then what really piqued my interest and motivated me to write the book was when my wife and I visited Sedona, Arizona, not far from you, I think. You're
right
in Arizona, aren't you?
That's correct.
Well, then you're well aware of Sedona, correct?
Very well. It's beautiful. I love it.
Oh, it's one of the most beautiful, if not the most beautiful city in America. We observed in the night sky an orange orb. And suddenly a second one emerged either from it or from behind it. They remained stationary for several minutes, and then they suddenly winked out. I don't know if that was a message to me from some other non-human entity, or could certainly have been some atmospheric phenomena or plasma-like related event. But nevertheless, that more than caught my attention, and soon after that I began putting things down on paper.
About what year was that?
That was 2012.
Oh, okay, so not too long ago. Wow, that's a great sighting. Had you had any other sightings?
Yeah, and it's not uncommon. No, I haven't.
Right, it's not uncommon, which is interesting. And what about when you were a kid? Did your family or people you knew have sightings that kind of inspired you?
No, I wasn't aware of that. My inspiration maybe evolved out of watching too many reruns of Twilight Zone and Star Trek. But those who grew up at that time, flying saucers as they were called, of course, back then, was maybe a little bit more in the forefront in the media, and especially with government led and scientific-led research projects like Project Blue Book, among many others, were ongoing at the time. It got more media attention, and now it does and doesn't, but things have died down. Now it's more of a new age type of movement, shall we say.
Yeah, which is interesting. What do you make of that? Because you're someone who's been around for a while. In fact, our last guest last week had been looking into this topic for about 50 years. And I don't know that people, especially new to this field, really understand that back in the 60s, even in the 50s, the conversation around this topic was more led by the military and scientists, whereas now, like you said, it's more new agey. What do you make of that evolution?
It's very discouraging, and I draw much attention to this theme in my book. It's largely ignored by mainstream science, when in fact just the opposite should be the case. This is a real phenomenon. I have no doubt that UFOs exist. And I say that based on my extensive research on ufology. It's as well as discussions with many individuals and physicists and scientists and non-scientists who have had direct, upfront, personal encounters of varying kinds with UFOs as well as non-human intelligent beings. There is certainly a phenomenon going on. The question, obviously, is the who, what, and whys associated with that phenomenon. Are they extraterrestrial, extra or intradimensional, as many suspect, or could it possibly be some type of phenomenon associated with the mind that we are not aware of at the present time? But the similarity of the experiences over hundreds of thousands, if not much more, cannot be dispelled. We have to consider that there is some degree of credibility associated with that. And we are seeing these kinds of results as a result of our research as part of the Foundation for Extraterrestrial Encounters, where we have collected from over 2,000 individuals who claim to have conscious recall of their experiences with, shall we say, ET, although I don't like that term, but maybe we can use it just for simplicity's sake. They report very similar types of experiences, which we will get into the data, at some point in time during our discussion. But the nature of the phenomenon is so perplexing and unique that one cannot help but be stimulated by it and consider it to be valid at some level. Now, many people in the field of ufology will make firm conclusions about what the phenomenon is all about, which is highly premature at this point in time. But nevertheless, I truly am very turned off, tired of hearing the same type of debate and arguments about whether or not that object is a UFO. How often do people discuss this in books, on radio shows, in various media forums, just trying to decide whether or not it is indeed unidentified? Excuse the expression, but big deal. That's not the point. We're not trying to determine if UFOs exist. They do exist. Stop debating about whether or not that thing that lit up and changed colors and moved at 12,000 miles per hour and made right angle turns, defies the laws of gravity and inertia, is in fact a UFO. It is. These things do exist. There's more than ample evidence about their kinematic, physical maneuverability. It's a physical effects, psychological effects on individuals who encounter it. That's no debate. But yet, ufologists continue to conduct retrospective analyses by continuing to debate whether or not Roswell represented a crash of some kind of saucer from somewhere else, or was a Russian plane, or Project Mogul weather balloon, or if Rendlesham Forest incident was in fact valid, the Phoenix Lights, we can go on and on. Nothing is going to be gained by continuing to try to dissect, as we continually do in various ways, whether or not these events represent a type of alien craft from wherever, whatever space-time they may be, or solar system, that we're not going to understand, in other words, the essence of the phenomenon using the same type of approach. What we need to do, and what Free is now in the process of doing, is collecting from, again, individuals who claim to have conscious recall of such experiences by trying to better understand the essence of that experience.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to them? What was unique? What are the similarities or dissimilarities among the thousands of individuals who we have already obtained data on and are continuing to get data from in the form of now qualitative responses? They're elaborating, in other words, on the quantitative surveys that we had given them, which are very revealing.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I want to get into that. And it's interesting you're saying this because your book is called The UFO Phenomenon, Should I Believe? And I guess my question would be, who was the audience for that book? Because certainly for you, that's a foregone conclusion that the phenomena exists.
Without a doubt. And yet I approached the book with an objective in mind, whereby I would not lead the reader one way or another in terms of believing it or not. Presenting the evidence, providing some opinions, but nevertheless not trying to sway the reader in one direction or another. I don't think that is entirely appropriate, because people tend to believe things that are consistent with their own beliefs and disagree with things they hear or see that's not consistent with their beliefs. So I try to maintain an objective approach, as I'm doing in my book on the afterlife. And it's for the individual who is just beginning to find an interest in this unique phenomena, as well as the more experienced ufologist, where I bring in some scientific principles, trying to explain what might be behind the, shall we say, force that governs and regulates its behavior. Speculative in nature, of course, but everybody has their own theory, which is far, far from certain, again, despite the conclusions that many individuals make in this field, which is another unfortunate issue, which is why this mainstream science regards ufology as a pseudoscience. They are highly skeptical of it because of the lack of the scientific method used in analyzing, testing the various theories, shall we say, which probably is not possible given our limited scientific principles to apply to understand the underlying foundation of the phenomenon, which seems too intangible to test, to adequately study. And the evidence thus is elusive, and the questions are much more than the answers that we have.
So, I mean, even though you feel that we're past, or at least maybe UFO researchers should be past the question of whether or not something's a UFO, I mean, that kind of seems where the book is. The book is in that conversation of whether or not the phenomena exists. And essentially you're providing information in an unbiased manner to the reader where they can weigh what they think given what the information you've provided, where you see that, there's enough evidence and there's enough information that, it's obvious there's a phenomena, whereas others, and I guess that's where the conversation is still pertinent and still exists, is in the mainstream, in those people who are just beginning to be curious. They still have not, made up their minds. So that conversation is certainly, at least in the mainstream kind of discussion.
That's right, and that's very well said. I'm not trying to lead them one way or another, nor do I dispute or dispel prior investigations into the phenomenon, which has existed for many, many decades, and we can spend many, many hours talking about that. But obviously, it's not not relevant here and now. The point is, if somebody is uncertain whether or not UFOs are real, what they need to do is study the collective evidence. And unfortunately, too many people who don't believe the phenomenon to be valid for whatever reason is not aware of the collective evidence, and that's unfortunate because there is more than ample evidence to lend considerable credibility into the validity of the phenomenon. Again, the question is, what governs it? Are we talking about non-humans who are operating vehicles, or are we talking about something completely different? And we don't know. We don't know. But I'm presenting classic cases like Roswell and Rendlesham and the Belgium incidents, on and on, Washington, D.C., even 52, among many others, more of the more critical ones, as well as the research that has been conducted, Project Blue Book, Cometa Report, Condign, worldwide for many decades, and the results of that. The disclosure documents that have come through via the Freedom of Information Act, the citizens' hearing on disclosure led by Greer and Bassett, which is profoundly interesting. Everybody who has even the slightest interest in the phenomenon should get on YouTube and search for the Disclosure Project. Here we have many individuals from high up in the government and military to the average civilian who experienced events associated with this phenomenon that are extraordinarily difficult to ignore. When Jafari, the Iranian pilot, describes in great detail how he pursued a UFO, tried to fire upon it, unsuccessfully, of course, and the maneuverability of that craft, which he interpreted to be moving, approximately 7-8 miles in less than a second, on up to 12,000 miles per hour, and another craft came out of it, et cetera, et cetera. These kinds of reports make me, at least, scratch my head in very vigorous ways. I don't know how to interpret it, other than I don't dispel or dispute the psychological state of so many individuals who have had these kinds of unique encounters, not necessarily up in the sky, but in their bedroom, and they have reports seeing the Greys or other beings come in and whisk them away into a craft, and maybe they receive some kind of medical experimental testing for whatever reason, experience telepathic communication from these beings and messages. But what's most interesting is the transformative behavioral changes that they report. That's positive. Let me emphasize, that's positive in nature. Something that is quite inconsistent with what we often see in books and on the internet, which describe these kinds of encounters, or shall we use the term alien abductions? Not a great term, but for the most part, it's regarded or mentioned in a negative way. And initially, when people report being so-called abducted, it is a highly fearful experience. But so many of these individuals, at least through our research, has shown that through conscious recall, while initially their feelings were of fear, over time, through repeated abductions, which is not uncommon, they don't want it to end. They don't want it to end. Over 90% of these individuals say that. They do not want it to end. And you have to say, why? Mm-hmm. That's because it is a positive, highly positive experience for the vast majority. And you wonder why. But they are positively changed in many, many ways. And I'll we can get into the data to provide the specific details of that sense.
Well, and so the question then is, with free, I guess one of the questions, I've had a lot of questions, I haven't been able to get them, and so I'm really excited to have you on. So for instance, I asked Rudy Shield some questions, who you guys list as part of the organization, but he really didn't know much. He said his name is on it, he supports your efforts. Similar to what Dr. Edgar Mitchell says, he supports your efforts, but they're not really doing the work. It sounds like you're one of the guys who's down there crunching these numbers and working the data, which is so my question is, one of the claims for the research is it says it's like the first academic research study into the experience of UFO contact. However, you're probably aware Dr. Leo Sprinkle did an inventory of experiencers. Recently, Kathleen Martin and Denise Stoner did that as well. What's the difference? What makes yours the first comprehensive academic research study and theirs not?
Yes. Several things make our current study uniquely different from theirs, and I commend them for attempting to collect the necessary information about in their personal experiences. For one, in the Martin Stoner study, only 50 individuals were used in their population, and they all were subjected to hypnotic regression. Other similar types of studies were conducted in the past, very few in nature, but those that were done also consisted of only a few individuals. Even Dr. John Mack from Harvard, the psychiatrist from Harvard University, he interviewed over 300 individuals who claimed to have been abducted, but they too were subjected to hypnotic regression, which is to be scrutinized in terms of the accuracy or validity of the responses received, given the nature of the information retrieval. In our study, we're talking about over 2,200 individuals who already have responded, who claim at least to have conscious recall, not lucid dreaming, not hypnotic regression, not meditation, etc. And we have asked them not 5, 10 questions as previous small-scale studies have done. In our 2 quantitative surveys, we asked over 600 questions over many, many different themes related to the experience, like the transformative effect on behavior, the physical interaction, the psychological effects, paranormal issues related to that, spiritual issues, and the nuts and bolts. What did these guys look like? What information was communicated, etc., etc. And now, on over 700 individuals, we have received their qualitative, in-depth responses to these questions. So we have literally over 10,000 Word documents, individual pages of this information, which we are now I'm currently, and our research team is currently in the process of analyzing. The next phase consists of 4 phases. The first 2, again, were quantitative. We're now moving into the 2 qualitative phases with the same individuals. In the 4th phase, which we're now working on now in terms of developing the paradigm, we're going to be conducting in-depth interviews with a subset of that population in order to, again, better understand the essence of the experience and analyze it from that perspective. So it's quite uniquely different from prior studies in many, many ways. And we'll see some similarities, but the validity of the results obtained from our study, I believe, are certainly more noteworthy, something that the scientific community cannot dispute or dispel. It may not be the best ideal type of research, but I can't think of any other way to conduct it, given the nature of the phenomenon and the individuals who experience it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that would be, for the scientific community, then, what it seems your research would be, as opposed to a study on experiencers of UFO contact with non-human intelligence, it would be more of research study on people who claim to have experiences with non-human intelligence, which is 2 different things. I think I think the study's certainly worthwhile and interesting, but it would really be that, right? How do you argue that these people are really having these experiences, as opposed to just people who are claiming to have had this experience?
Oh, I agree completely.
Mm-hmm.
I asked the same thing. Likewise, related to that question, when I joined Free last year, and it was recently established by Ray Hernandez, a tax attorney with the U.S. government, and Rudy Shield, astrophysicist and professor at Harvard University, former astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who recently passed away, and Mary Rodwell, also a researcher in this area from Australia. I asked the same questions. Also, how do we control for the mental state of these individuals? How do we know that they're not fantasy prone or have some psychosis? And you can't control for it 100%, but we ask many questions in our surveys. We're going to follow up in the interviews and try to get a better sense of these related issues to control for these confounding variables, shall we say. And yes, some people who claim to have the experience, many people claim many things that certainly aren't true. And I suspect that there is a subset of our over 2,200 individuals who responded to our questionnaires thus far. I'm sure what percent, I don't know, are not valid for whatever reason. Either making it up, playing a game, psychological aberration of some type, whatever else. But we're trying to control as best as possible through a survey, and surveys are not the best kind of a way to conduct research. But when we're dealing with the type of phenomenon such as UFOs, where people claim to be abducted or not, but have personal contact in some way, you have to approach it from a phenomenological basis, a qualitative basis, and that's accepted research in sociology, anthropology, etc. John Klimo, a well-known psychologist in parapsychology, he's an expert in this area, and he's on our research team. So we're paralleling, so to speak, adopting many of his research paradigms, which have been proven to be successful in the past. Not that our results are going to be not scrutinized, or skeptics are going to criticize it for not being reliable or valid for whatever reason. That's fine. But the point is, we'll present the data, let greater minds try to make sense out of it, hopefully draw more people from the scientific community and social sciences into this area of study, because it is extraordinarily unique. Even if it's not a phenomenon associated with non-humans and UFOs, the fact that so many people are claiming to have conscious recall of this extraordinary phenomenon in such diverse, enigmatic ways should at the very least, spark the interest of many psychologists and sociologists and anthropologists, etc., to continue studying this area. It doesn't mean, people from Mars are coming here, to find cheese or whatever. It means something extraordinary. And I'm not one to say that is the case. Beings are coming here from another space-time or another solar system. It may very well be. It may not be. And I'm trying to be objective as much as possible. I cannot be moved by it. But what strikes me is the similarity of the responses from so many people who don't communicate with one another. There's something going on. I'll be so bold as to say that something extraordinary going on, and it's consistent. What we're seeing is consistent with what Alan Hynek said, who led Project Blue Book for over 20 years, and other scientific investigations led by the government back in the 70s. John Mack, the well-known Pulitzer Prize-winning psychiatrist from Harvard University, Jacques Vallée, among others, who said it's not only a physical phenomenon, but it's also a psychic or mental one. They picked up on it back then. But we are going many steps further. And also seeing, it is a nuts and bolts issue, no question about it. But there is also a firm, pronounced psychologic, behavioral transformative effect on the individual that is long-lasting, that is permanent, for the good, for the better.
That's what I found interesting with Dr. Sprinkle's study, because he discovered that as well. And it seems like these studies are all having similar results. But that argument that you just made, that even if it's not related to people from Mars or something like that, it's still important because so many people are claiming to have similar experiences. But that's why I personally am very careful with the language, because I interface with mainstream media often, and so I have to be careful to be sure to maintain credibility. And I think that's what I wonder. Do you think it might be better to call this a research study on people who claim to have experiences, as opposed to saying it's a research study on experiencers? Because it seems like scientists, certainly psychologists and others, would be more, and you would know better than I, but it seems like they would be more inclined to participate in a study that says it's about claims of experiences, as opposed to, they might be more, off-put by a research study that is saying that these are experiencers of the phenomena.
Well said. I can't agree more. And I will emphasize that certainly in when I speak about free and the associated results from our study at conferences, when we write this up for publication in various media forms and scholarly journals, without question. It is based on claims. I'm not going to push this down anybody's throat or telling them again, this is highly factual. Everybody's reporting this is sane, et cetera, et cetera. I'm skeptical myself. My scientific background, dictates that internally, so to speak. So we have to be very careful and skeptical, no question, about the nature of the responses and who they are coming from. I can't agree more with what you just said, but nevertheless, we get insights into the phenomena from the surveys and the qualitative results obtained thus far into maybe the objectives of these non-humans, again, who are claimed to be non-humans, the type of communication that they experience, the effects on consciousness, even near-death experiences, and the life-changing transformation that they undergo, among others. For instance, 93% of the 2,200 individuals, again, who claim to have conscious recall of this experience, they believe that these ETs, again, I don't like that term, let's just say non-humans, are from other planets or dimensions, and that they're already among us. 93% agree with that. 84% say communicated with a non-human intelligent being. They describe these ETs. Of course, the short grays are commonly seen, as everyone familiar with the phenomenon is aware. But interestingly, human-looking ETs, 54%. That's the highest being reported. Human-looking, not exactly, but they appear, very, very similar to us.
Higher than the gray types?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
A little bit, yeah, yeah. And then we have a wide range. The insectoids, 15%. The tall grays, short grays, reptilians, 15%. Even energetic beings, and that was fairly high. Spirit or ghost-like. That was also very high. So I don't know if we're looking at different phenomenon or possibly different species that's being claimed to have been experienced. But the interesting, again, point is that mostly are human in appearance, whereas the media, the internet, etc., reports basically all being short grays, large head, insect-like eyes, narrow neck. You ever think we all know what the description is? But 43% said that they recall being on an ET craft, conscious recall. And that 57% said that they had contact with a non-human on a craft. 32% said more than 10 times. It's not uncommon to have repeated abductions, bad term, but that's what we use, and for it to exist within the same family. We also ask many questions about family contact, and it's not surprising that it supports prior research that's common. There are also many responses that are similar to the near-death experience that people also claim to report. I'm not saying that they're actually leaving their body and entering another realm of existence, but there are some similarities. And Dr. Kenneth Ring, who did research in this area, saw similarities between the UFO and near-death experiences. 54% said they felt separated from their body during the encounter with non-humans. They felt that they encountered a mystical being and heard unidentifiable voices. 86% said that to be the case. Telepathy was experienced in 41% of the individuals.
Wow, actually, that's lower than I would have expected.
Well, I was going to say, I agree with you. Then there was another related question. A non-physical thought or voice download, 37%. So, I don't know how to make that distinction. Telepathic voices, a voice download, or a sense of knowing. A lot of people say there's an understanding. It's vague, but it's nonverbal. These ETs don't open their mouth and pronounce syllables the way we are accustomed to doing, but they receive information non-verbally. The question is, do they enter some other unearthly world? 69% say yes. Do they seem to understand everything? 57%. That related to everything about the universe or about themselves and others. Did they experience a multidimensional experience? 82% said yes. And interestingly, 35% said that they had a near-death experience, which is much higher than what the incidence statistics of NDEs have been reported to be. But, again, I'm not going to go over 600 questions asked, but 90% say they feel that there is a grand plan in motion by these entities that all experiences are a part of. There's some kind of a evolutionary force, something that's trying to increase self-awareness, spirituality, our sensitivity to others, making us more loving, more ecologically sensitive, awakening me, so to speak, to a larger consciousness or cosmic force. We're talking about over 70% of the 2,200 individuals, who claim to have this experience are saying that. Why? Again, the similarity with such a large database. I don't have the answer.
I wonder, and maybe you would know this, if it's similar to other inventories of people who believe they've had a spiritual experience. So, for instance, perhaps Christians who believe that they've had an experience with God or Christ or Mother Mary or something like that, if they've had similar or claim to have had, similar messages.
Well, yes, there are parallels there. Yes, indeed. And you have to be careful interpreting the results I shared with you, which may certainly represent some degree of bias. People believe, obviously, in a God, in Jesus, many things. Interpret the Bible literally, which is more astonishing than the UFO phenomenon if you interpret it literally. Yeah, people do believe in things without an objective, tangible evidence where they see it and feel it and measure it. Many great minds, many scientists who are objective in nature in terms of their experimental work, they believe in a God, which seems at least to be inconsistent with their scientific principles of proving or disproving a theory or hypothesis. But we have biases for whatever reason, faith-based beliefs that may or may not be true. But we're all subjected to making these possible errors in inductive reasoning. So we cannot dismiss that the data here too are somewhat similar. Maybe they want to believe in it and thus are telling us that they are having this experience. We have to be very careful about how to translate, understand, make conclusions from the data, and the qualitative results will build upon some of these binary responses from our quantitative surveys in order to better understand just that, to control, in other words, for the questions that you are very wisely raising. We have to use a scientific method as much as possible. It's not ideal research, but in my point is this. This is the direction ufology should go. Draw members from the scientific community, ideally a multidisciplinary team from many different physical and social sciences, to study this phenomenon in similar manners to the way we are, as well as unrelated manner. But the essence is to better understand the nature of the experience that people say they had with this phenomenon, and to establish a very large population base, which we are attempting to do, and we are doing this worldwide. We're in the process of doing it in many, many countries. We've received 500 responses from our collaborators in Latin America. We have a team in Germany who's also in the process of administering it. In Russia, we're going to expand in many other countries, in France. So, over time, and we're not talking about the study ending here and now, we're just beginning. This is going to be multi-year in nature, cross-cultural, and we have, research teams, all over the map, in order to try to formulate some better understanding of the phenomenon through those who have experienced it.
Mm-hmm. I think, it's all just extremely fascinating. I mean, my bachelor's is in psychology, and I have a certificate in hypnotherapy. And so, I mean, I'm very fascinated with this arena. But it almost, I kind of have a perspective that all of these areas of research are important. But I also wonder if your findings may find that just because, dealing with other paranormal areas, that when people believe that they've interfaced with the supernatural, that these changes that you've talked about, or these thoughts and ideas that you've talked about, are universal. So, in other words, it's not just that they've interfaced with what they believe to be a UFO or a non-human intelligence, but that these findings are similar across the board with people who believe they've had an experience, supernatural experience, whether that be with Buddha or any other, or Bigfoot, because really, or ghosts, because you do hear similar ideas across the board, it seems.
Yeah, it's catchy. People watch the same shows. They're persuaded by what they hear, and we're all susceptible to believing things that we hear. Mm-hmm. We make errors in terms of inductive reasoning. It's hard to maintain objectivity all the time. So when you mention the word ghost, everybody will say, a foggy impression, looked white. We come up with the same story, in other words, associated with the experience. Likewise, when you mention UFOs, people may say, the short gray with the big eyes, big head, small body. Right. We are influence without question. I agree with you completely. And we have to be aware just of that, preconceived notions. Yes. Mm-hmm. And we ask that. We do get into that too.
Because it's interesting, like for instance in hypnotherapy, there's this method where you have someone interface with their higher self, or interface with someone that you manifest via suggestion, is someone they draw from their own subconscious, that is someone of ultimate wisdom. And what that person represents, they often give messages back to the person that they already know, and they're often messages that are similar to people who believe they've gotten messages from Bigfoot, or people who believe they've gotten messages from Jesus, or people who've got messages from aliens, is that you need to treat your planet better, you need to be nicer to each other. All of these things that we kind of, our spiritual leaders tell us, and that we kind of teach our children, that unfortunately we need to remind ourselves of.
Alejandro, I greatly appreciate you mentioning that, because here again, that's a potential confounding variable in our results. But why? And I agree with you. Mm-hmm. But why do so many people say that they have been transformed? Over 70% say, based on their experience, conscious recall of the encounter, they have strongly increase their desire to help others. They have much more compassion for others. They appreciate the ordinary things in life. They're more interested in psychic phenomenon. They're able to love others in an impersonal way. They're more sensitive to the suffering of others. They're more concerned with spiritual matters. They become less, and we're talking over 70% say this, they're less interested now in organized religion, where before they were, now they're not. They're more spiritual. They understand themselves much more deeply. They want to achieve a higher state of consciousness. 86% said that. So, on and on along these lines, but they understand what life is all about. 79% said that. Purpose to life. They have a better, a more spiritual, conscious, expanding effect as a result. Now, I don't know how to interpret that. Let people much smarter than I try to make sense out of it. It might relate to some of the things that you're talking about. We have to be very careful not to interpret these results literally, as if it means, yes, UFOs are coming down here, ETs are coming out, and bringing people up into their craft and doing the XYZ and transforming them behaviorally. I can't make that kind of conclusion. It's premature to do so. Unfortunately, many ufologists do that. Like many ufologists say, extraterrestrial craft landed in Roswell, or et cetera, et cetera. The point is this. I don't know what to make of this data, but this is the direction where research needs to go. And that's my main message. Stop analyzing Roswell, the Phoenix Lights, Rendlesham. I think it's necessary. I commend individuals who have done that. We learned a great deal about the phenomenon. By doing so, we established that it is a real phenomenon. These things do amazing things. They're miles long.
But what if those incidents turns out to be, let's say, a human-made object, like a black project or something like that? I mean, that's why I think research in all of those areas is still important. Certainly, I agree with you. There needs to be more research in the direction that you're talking about. But I think the study of all of those instances still needs to continue, I think.
At some level, yes. I agree with you. Many of these experiences are black projects. But when you go back into the 60s, 50s, and people like former astronaut Gordon Cooper, who was one of the original astronauts, when he starts talking about seeing a saucer-like craft descend on the desert floor through his own eyes, as well as many others with him, and it lands, and then it immediately takes off in a blink of an eye. He also pursued them in the 50s in test aircraft, trying to, and they were achieving altitudes and flying at speeds that, in his mind at least, and I take his word for it, were not man-made, were not of this earth. He's not alone. When it occurs way back then, there's no black box project that I know of, maybe I'm wrong, that could have done those kinds of things at that point in time. We have so many instances like that, where it's hard to write off. There's too numerous pieces of evidence along those lines that contradict any conspiracy or disinformation campaign or black box related project. That goes on, yes, indeed. But we should continue some degree of research along those lines. I agree with you. We can possibly gain more insight into the phenomenon doing so. But I think, however, much more emphasis should be placed on focusing attention by ufologists and hopefully the general mainstream scientific community in this direction. uh, the meaningfulness, the essence of the experience on individuals' lives. Now, will this lead us down a dark tunnel? Possibly, but we at least need to try to focus some degree of effort in this area.
Mm-hmm. My last question, because we're running out of time, and I just love the topic. I could go back and forth with you for all day, for the rest of the day. But this is really interesting. But I know some people will be thinking out there, well, what about the work of David Hopkins or David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins? They interviewed, according to them, thousands of people, and their conclusions were very different. What is your take on their work?
Well, one, the data they collected was through hypnotic regression, and they've been criticized for that use of that technique. It's valid at many levels. American Psychological Association does acknowledge it as a very useful tool for many things, but not necessarily in terms of accuracy in recall, and that's why it's not admissible in a court of law. They also reported that the alien abduction experience was largely a negative one, which our survey completely contradicts. So, the last experiences are generally, are regarded as positive by over 90%. Of the individuals. Again, initially, it was a highly negative, fearful experience, as it should be for anyone. But they adapt over time, and they realize, so they claim, the many significant benefits derived from their continued encounters, so shall we say, abductions. It's hard to interpret their results literally, because they may have potentially led their clients, although they say they were very careful not to do so. But still, the methodology, which was distinctly different than ours, makes it such that we're comparing apples and oranges, so to speak. Nevertheless, they presented very interesting results. It's not accepted. It's been criticized, certainly, in many various ways. Likewise with John Mack, initially a skeptic, became a believer. That people were at least believing, or claimed to believe, that they were being abducted. And obviously he came to that conclusion and had a fight for tenure with the Harvard administration.
Yeah.
Which,
interesting. He thought it was a very much a non-physical, kind of out-of-body experience for the most part.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's why we're drawing parallels with our research, which says the same thing. It's consistent with what he said, with Dr. Alan Hynek. These are people I regard very highly in the field. There's not many ufologists, if you want to call them that, who I do concur with, but there are a handful who I greatly respect, like Hynek and Vallée and Hines, Hastings, among others, certainly, that I consider more I'll listen. Let's just say I'll listen to them with more open ears than many others. In terms of analyzing what presidents know about UFOs or not know, that's important. Debating the MJ-12 document, that's important at some level. But we know the government, military always consider this to be a very important topic of concern. We know that they try to downplay it and hide it. Nick Pope, I have great respect for, and he admitted it. The British government, he was at the UFO desk for the Ministry of Defense, and he admitted that they purposefully presented a disinformation campaign not to alarm the public, and they don't have answers, more than likely. Not any more than maybe what we do. I get so turned off by many ufologists saying we have some secret underground base with dead aliens and some, in the desert somewhere, or Area 51 has UFOs. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Show me the data, give me the evidence. Don't make firm conclusions in the absence of such evidence. But we're looking at basically anecdotal evidence, although there is some physiologic and physical evidence in the form of electromagnetic radiation. I mean, we can go into great detail about that. In landing sites where UFOs were reported to have been observed, effects on germination, plant growth, et cetera, cow mutilations, crop circles, and the whole 9 yards. I mean, maybe all these phenomena are interrelated, and I get into that in my book on the afterlife and theories of quantum physics, which again is highly theoretic, but it might serve as a basis to explain the phenomenon. And we do have many physicists like Rudy Shields on Free. He is the executive director, Harvard University astrophysicist, who firmly believes that this is a real phenomenon. And by the way, before I forget, your listeners, if they're interested in learning more about the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, to visit our website at experiencer.org. Experiencer.org. They could visit my website too, which is the UFOphenomenon.com. The UFOphenomenon.com. They could read about, if they're interested in getting more information about me and my book, etc. But they can see our survey results on experiencer.org. They can read many papers that are scientific and non-scientific in nature, many written by members of Free. And this is not a new age group. Let me dispel any questions about this. We have many leading physicists, psychologists. I can't speak about myself. I'm biased, but and non-scientists, experiencers, people who've worked with experiencers. It's a serious study by very smart people, and it should not be completely dispelled out of hand. But at the very least, look at our papers, look at the data. I'm trying not to force feed it in a sense. I might sound like it or arm twist people into believing this. I don't know what to make of it. All I'm basically saying is the data is extraordinarily interesting. The research should focus again, and I'm sorry for the redundancy, more so in this area. Keep up, yes, with the nuts and bolts research, and I commend the ufologists that have done so in the past, and certainly people like you who continue to discuss this extraordinary phenomenon in the media. You're to be highly commended for what you do. This is a significant issue of our time that is unfortunately ignored by mainstream science, when just the opposite should be the case. And theories, they abound. Maybe the issues are in quantum physics, the answers in terms of alternate dimensions, and Stephen Hawking, the smartest guy. Don't listen to me, listen to Stephen Hawking. He'll get into the wormhole issues and alternate space-times, other dimensions that allow for the possibility of other entities to coexist with ours. I don't know how he comes up with that, but many physicists believe that too. This is mathematics.
I want to get in one more question. We've gone over, but you talk about the mainstream and the other smart people out there, and I am curious. What do your colleagues, the other mainstream scientists that you've worked with, have you spoken with them about this topic, and how do they generally react?
Wow. I've purposely only spoke to maybe a few. Of course, people in academia, for a variety of reasons, are reluctant to admit that they have a great interest in this topic area. I think, again, for fear of ridicule, certainly. And people do, interpret it, unfortunately, in the wrong way, like this guy's nuts. You know what I mean? Which, and I'm not entirely sure why, but it's a far out notion. It's a strange phenomenon. Many scientists don't have the answer, so they don't want to study it. It defies scientific principles, so they disagree with it and consider it an area not worthy of study. So I purposely, I remained, so to speak, in the ufology closet and only shared it with a few who were highly skeptical of it. I eventually gave them my book, not to persuade them, but to say, before you denounce it or think I'm a little wacky, which I admit I probably am at some level. Understand the facts. And that's another important message that I must get across to your listeners, especially for those who are just beginning to develop an interest in this area. Seriously study the evidence. Go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, conclusions from scientific studies, and thoroughly investigate it before you make a final decision. Unfortunately, there's a lot of nonsense out there and a lot of sense, and it's hard to decipher who and what to believe. And it's those books that do exist out there. My mom was abducted by an alien from Venus. You know what I mean? It's unfortunately, it gives ufology a bad name. And people are very much turned off to the overarching issue of ufology by such kinds of takes or blogs and books that are just utter nonsense, while there are very excellent texts as well out there, and radio shows like yours in particular that have very good guests. I'm not making comment about myself, but I listen to your show all the time, and I really appreciate your insights and the quality of the guests that you do have. I listen to it while going to sleep and upon waking up. I find it very interesting who you have. I was listening to Whitley Strieber you had on. I forget the individual's name.
Well, thank you. Now you're embarrassing me.
Not intentionally, but it's true.
Well, thank you very much, and
we need more shows like this.
Well, thank you very much, and I think you are right up there. This has been fascinating. I think you've been an absolutely wonderful guest. I'm so happy that you were able to make time and come on the show and share more about the organization. And yeah, I'll definitely talk about the links again, and I'll have them up on our website and on the description for the show. But this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure to speak with you. Keep up the great work you're doing, and I'm sure you will. And I thank your listening audience for tolerating my diatribe for an hour or so. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Bob for being on the show. I thought that was a fascinating discussion. I'm so happy to have found out more about FREE, to find out more about their organization and their work. And like he said, you can read all the what their research has shown so far. With all of those questions, he was only able to get into a few. But I was certainly found what he did talk about fascinating. But you can find that at experiencer.org, like he mentioned, experiencer.org. And you can read more about him and his book, The UFO Phenomenon, at theUFOphenomenon.com. What a great URL. It's great he was able to get that one. theUFOphenomenon.com. Again, thank you so much, Bob, for being on the show. It was great talking to you. I had a wonderful time. And everybody check out what they're doing. It's really interesting stuff. And I'm excited to see more about his book. I actually do not have a copy, and I want to look into it further because it sounds really interesting. And, he's a great mind and a great asset to UFO research, I think. So really interesting stuff. Also, thank you to Martin Willis again for doing the UFO news with us. You can find all the news that Martin and I talked about at openminds.tv. You'll also find a new UFO report. You'll also find on the front page in the upper right a way to put in your email to get our email newsletters. So every 2 weeks we put out an email newsletter. Well, really twice a month. It averages out to every 2 weeks. And I just get, really floored on not to, pat myself on the back, or our organization, like Michael Klein and Roger Marsh, who help with all of this content, and Linda Zimmerman, who wrote something recently, and all our other contributors. But we always have a lot of content that builds up within 2 weeks. So I'm able to put a lot of stuff in these emails. The emails, of course, are overviews of everything that we've done and links, but it keeps you up to date in what's going on. And I know how it is. Our lives get so busy that sometimes it's difficult to do that. So an email just kind of letting you know everything we've done in the last couple of weeks is really helpful. And it's also a very quick way to get up to speed with what's going on in the UFO news. So at openminds.tv, you can go add your email to our list, or you can just email contact@openminds.tv, and we'll add you to our email list. So I encourage people to do that. We have another UFO video on there, one of those short videos Michael, our video guy, is putting together. And so some good stuff up there. Also, I'm going to have more and more news on there about our videos on demand. So we have a video portal where you can go subscribe, and you have access to hundreds of lectures from the UFO Congress. So you have Jacques Vallée, Linda Zimmerman, and some of the other speakers. You have John Greenwald, you have George Knapp and Bob Lazar, you have John Alexander and Lee Spiegel. So a lot of our really popular and great speakers you can find at this video portal. So for one low fee, you have access to all of them, and you can watch them at your leisure. And we have a lot of great panels, such as debates between Stanton Friedman and John Alexander. We have a lot of great panels and fun stuff that you can catch on there. And the great thing is you're going to probably find a lot of stuff you didn't even know existed. So a lot of people weren't aware before we had him. We have a lot of speakers like that. For instance, Bob Schroeder. A lot of people didn't know who he was, and he's a guy who's written a book about the science of UFOs, and he was a really popular lecturer at our conference, and he's become a more popular speaker because he's got really interesting stuff. And if you heard him, you would have seen that he has a lot of science that is really baffling, so it's one of those things where it's important to review it periodically to remind yourself, what did he say? So some really good stuff. You could go to the video portal at openminds.tv. But thank you all for being here. We have more interviews scheduled for the next few weeks. Thank you all for returning and listening to the show. It's wonderful to get in the swing of things and be back to our regular weeklies because, of course, during the holidays and the conference, things get really hectic, and so we're kind of sporadic, but it's nice to be back to doing a weekly show and being able to talk to you guys on a weekly basis. Thank you so much to Caleb Hanks for doing the opening and close music. He's got some awesome stuff. You can find information at openminds.tv/radio on the radio page, how to get to Caleb's music. I often have questions. Hey, man, how do I get to his music? It's cool. I think it's cool, too. And you can download his songs for free. And I listen to him periodically, regularly, and because I love him. He's got great stuff. Very talented young man. As well as his brother, Micah Hanks, runs a Gralien Report. Both very funny and talented young whippersnappers. So, check them out. We're also thank you to the PSN Network who's running us, Dark Matter Radio who's running the show, everybody else who's a friend of ours. Thank you all so much. Thank you. You can check me out, by the way, in Roswell. I'm going to be speaking for the Roswell Daily Record, and I think at the museum. I'm not sure. And then I'll also be at the MUFON Symposium in August. You can find out more about that on our emails